Colin Rowe's legacy is mostly known from the students he taught and the colleagues he influenced. Throughout his career, he significantly focused on formalism as his architectural analysis approach. Throughout the time period that he was writing, modernism was the preferred style in America, which were the glass skyscrapers and the poor imitations of the modern prototype. He promotes the idea that architecture could be renewed by embracing the idea of form. Fred Coder is known for architecture, urban design, and theory. Both Colin Rowe and Fred Coder wrote the book Collage City, that is a discourse about urban modernist planning through the fragmentation and collaging of urban elements that include shape and figural open space into the continuous fabrication of a city. Some deem it as a radical theory, but in reality it is a reasonable approach because we can't keep knocking down history every time there's a change in new ideas. Buildings can be updated on the inside and structurally updated while keeping the original facade. Edgar Rodriguez, a professor at Syracuse University and a co-founder of an architectural practice named Operadora, based in Mexico City, states that cities are a place of inhabitation and this should be in constant change, continuity rewriting their histories. A living city doesn't treat history as an object or an image, but rather as a continuous place of inhabitation. Agreeing with the idea that there should be constantly change, but this change can be done through updates and renovations, and not completely demolishing buildings. But then brings up the question, how much can we change to keep sustainability until our resources are exhausted and prevent us from inventing more solutions? The first chapter is Utopia. In general, Utopia suggests that perfection is expected in all aspects of society. This is not only in the environment, but with people, politics, and especially the community. At one point, the modern city was the promised utopia people expected, where they imagined a future of efficiency with rational living environments. However, modernist city planning became a bitter part of history for many who imagined the built environment would be updated with the rest of technology. In the end, it was just that, a utopia or imagined society that would never be reality. K. Michael Hayes, a professor of architecture theory at Harvard University, critiques modern utopianism and a proposal for radical heterogeneity of appropriated form. He underscores the way to achieve architectural form, a form that is understood as the foremost sign and support of culture itself. He states that to establish his system, Rowe must dismiss any history other than architecture history, and avoid any historical determinism in order to place emphasis on the autonomous grid and heterogeneous fragments. This is not correct, however, as there is importance in understanding the world alongside architecture. Different events trigger different reactions, and understanding why people have negative or positive responses to new developments in society requires more insight than just architectural history. Such an opinion draws parallels with Le Corbusier's statement that the house is a machine for living, as not everything is as straightforward as it seems, and humans want more in their lives besides efficiency, as a machine would provide. Kyle Miller, a professor at Syracuse University, states that though there were some dynamic spatial innovations that broke down hierarchies in domestic environments, culturally and socially modernism was cold and inaccessible. Efficiency just happened to be the main goal of the modernist city, and if Rowe were to only look at modernism from an architectural history standpoint, as Hayes suggests, he would only be considered the logical responses and not the emotional ones, which are just as important. In the end, the environment is only a building block for living, and the way people choose to interact with what's around them will determine its success. This goes all the way back to Vitruvius and the 10 books on architecture, where he emphasizes the importance of architects understanding the varied branches of study. Rowe and Coder state that both the utopia and the real city convert a world of medieval and random into a more highly integrated situation of dignified and serious deportment. The contradicting myths of Utopia and Arcadia are defined, one relating to the end of history and the other to the beginning. Utopia celebrates triumphs of constraint, while Arcadia is defined as the presupposed blessings of freedom. Rowe spends time analyzing the modern utopia and its reality without any regard to the people and the way that they have been imagining the future themselves. Because of this, he fails to see that his statement of utopia celebrating triumphs of constraint does not hold any weight in regards to architects' promises to the people and the people's expectations that ultimately caused the modernist city to be unsuccessful. The second chapter is after the millennium, the time where people saw the lack of success in modernism, realizing that modern architecture was not creating a better world for them. They began to discover the truth behind the false promises modern architects had made, where modern buildings were not designed to match the efficiency required in everyday life, but more to match the aesthetics of progress and efficiency of new technology and inventions. In other words, modern architecture assured people that their societal issues would be solved, but only solved efficiency issues in the home and not within the community. Parker Everett, a professor at Duke University, analyzes modern architecture as a form of appearance of a structuring social form, where it was pseudo-concreteness projected onto social life, or facade of a structured community. Viewpoints from critics such as Everett allow communities negatively affected by modernist architecture to hold the liable architects accountable, and further indulge into their own research on more suitable architectural styles of shaping a society. Often, such inspiration has shown to come from either science fiction with ideas of megabuildings, lightweight throwaways, plug-in variability, integration of buildings and transportation, or even from interactive ideas such as Disney World. In such environments, unpleasantness is eliminated alongside time and tragedies. However, though these formulated societies are undeniably desirable, they are not realistic and further create problematic expectations similar to what modernist architecture imposed on societies that began society's public interrogation of many of the famous modernist architects from before. In the third chapter, Crisis of the Object, Predicament of Texture, they critique the modern architecture in object fixation, the idea that the object is not an object. The idea of modern architecture is a contradiction that is problematic that every object is separate from one another, and doesn't solve the problem of the traditional city integrating space and solid form. For example, Le Corbusier's project for the city center of Saint-Denis shows a freestanding building and criticizes that the center is an unfulfilling schizophrenia. Buildings as objects should not be disregarded completely, but they should be both space occupiers and space definers, and should maintain individual presence while providing continuity to the urban texture. They should not just be solid and void, but a mix that simulates the qualities of a solid city with the elements of void. Edgar Rodriguez continues this dialogue by stating, adding another problematic occurrence of the 20th century, that the objectivization of architecture finally developed to its commodification. Cities shifted from spaces of communal living into financial tools. However, Rowe and Coder contradict their own idea that modern architecture is a contradiction by stating, the traditional city is neither good nor bad, relevant or irrelevant in turn with the zeitgeist, nor is it the question of modern architecture's obvious defects. But now, it is the question of common sense and common interest, wishing to surrender neither and qualify both. In the fourth chapter, Collision City and the Politics of Bricolage, Rowe discussed the designers and the creators of the spaces rather than the spaces themselves, and proposed the concept of bricolage, which is considered the jumbled effect produced by the close proximity of buildings from different periods and in different architectural styles. He also stated that cities should be composed of the collage of various urban elements, including shaped figure open spaces, into the continuous fabric of a city with the concept of bricolage. British architect and historian Alan Calhoun reached an agreement on which collaging elements is a groundbreaking idea in his book From Bricolage to Myth, or How to Put Humpty Dumpty Together Again. Calhoun believes that buildings should be collages of various overlapping languages such as form, function, structure, and history. Although the two architects are concerned with collages at different scales, they both agree with the concept of putting collaging elements together to make a whole. On the other hand, Edgar Rodriguez neither agrees or disagrees with this idea. Instead, he sees it as a technique or a way of describing the world, one way more to write and represent meaning. In the fifth chapter, Collage City and the Reconquest of Time, they describe the city as a didactic instrument, an instrument to teach and inform through design, and now has to question what it cannot be, and what criteria is determined as a city's preferred ethical content. These ethical contents should be tradition and utopia, citing Karl Popper's definition of tradition as a felt needed for structure, social environment, a vehicle for betterment of society, and theories which have a value of helping to explain society. His traditional value is logical and needs to transform society through abstract utopian formulations. Even though they agree with Popper's idea of tradition, they criticize his work because it disregards the idea of utopia, because Popper thinks of it as a scrutiny and unthinking procedures and attitudes. He thinks that the utopia promises nothing more than a sociological nightmare, and that utopia is embedding in an obvious political connotation. In other words, Popper's evaluation of utopia and tradition seem to present irreconcilable style of critical involvement. In their proposal, they then define a city as a museum, the city as a positive concert of culture and educational purpose, the city as a benevolent source of random but carefully selected information, and that the collage is both an exhibit and scaffold. The idea of the collage supports the utopian illusion and fuels the reality of change, motion, action, and history. Edgar Rodriguez disagrees with the paternalistic and didactic view of the city, because in a sense, who would be the one curating the city and who specifically would be educated and how? But author K. Michael Hayes agrees with Rowe and Coder about the city being a museum in his book Architecture Theory since 1986, saying that the idea is that the collage becomes transhistorical even if it was historically motivated, allowing it to scaffold and exhibit. However, Anthony Gagliardi, a studio professor at Syracuse University and co-founder of Almost Studio based in New York City, says that a project like this are ideal, that had a utopian vision, and in this case, it is dystopian because of the collage and fragmentation. But it is hard to believe that any city would be universal in today's time period. He continues his argument by saying that the U.S. is made with different desires, interests, and should be like a collage city, and that no singular utopic vision is possible today. But Edgar Rodriguez thinks that their proposal is not radical today. He says that today we live in a post-historic reality where the idea of collapsing styles and time happens all the time, and where the writing of histories is a fluid creative work. The idea of collaging together pieces of history is ordinary, the opposite of radical, in 2021. In conclusion, the book Collage City by Colin Rowe and Fred Coder is not radical. On the contrary, it is a reasonable urban city planning proposal that allows for a diverse city through fragmentation and collage while keeping the history.